Good afternoon. Welcome to the Ars Electronica Garden Barcelona. I am Lluís Nacenta, a director of Hangar, and I'm here to do a short introduction to our garden. A group of art and research institutions of Barcelona came together to make this endeavor possible. The leading institution was Institut Ramon Llull, and coordinated with them, coordinated by Institut Ramon Llull. The institutions participant were Universitat Oberta de Catalunya, ICIA Barcelona, BIP Collection, New Art Foundation, OFF Festival, Hangar. And in the context of Hangar, one of the activities that we are presenting now, that it's a round table coordinated by researcher Laura Benitez. It's an activity that we present in the context of biofriction, that it's a Creative Europe research program that we are developing in Hangar. So this is all for my part. I pass the mic to Laura Benitez. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the introduction. Thanks to the organizers for making possible being here, to all the partners in crime in this garden Barcelona. It's pretty weird not being in Linz this year, not going to the Stadtwerkstatt, but at least we are here together in a different way. So as Luis was saying, today we have this roundtable that is organized in the framework of biofriction, this creative Europe project on bioart practices and biohacking practices. And biofriction is a project led by Hangar in collaboration with BioArt Society, Cultivamos Cultura, Kersnikova Institute, and with Anthropox in Bourges and the Biomedical Research Institute in Barcelona as an associated partners. So biofriction as a project, as I already mentioned, is a project on biohacking practices, on practices experimenting with biomaterials, with biotechnology, with the emancipatory potential of biotechnologies. And the title is a wordplay that refers to the combination of biology, biotech, fiction, and art surfaces of friction with, as I already said, with a particular attention to the emancipatory potential of biotech. So, as you can imagine, the title of this roundtable on biosonic agencies is also a wordplay combining Brandon's Lavelle proposal on sonic agency and artistic proposals experimenting with biomaterials and sound. But I would like to remark that this activity is not intended to be a roundtable on sound studies. When we were invited as a project to organize a roundtable within the framework of the Ars Electronica Festival, we thought that it might be interesting that since the so-called bioart practices and biohacking practices are generally approached in relation to their visual dimension, to their visual realm, and far less in relation to sound, we found, let's say, suggestive that this roundtable could work as a cross-pollination between different but close practices and theoretical proposals that are not always as entangled as we might perhaps suppose a priori. So the aim of this activity, in fact, is to address sonic agency and biopractices as triggers that challenge responsibilities as collective agents capable of making transitions between multiple levels of political, material, and conceptual organization. So we hope that at least we have the opportunity to speculate on biopractices and sonic agency as forms, forces of continuous weaving, as generative mediums and as world in laboratories. And as Nina Power pointed out, we are here today because sound offers a way into thinking about who and what is unseen in the visual regime. So, and appears on the surface to offer a more radical conception of what insurrectionary and emancipatory politics may look or rather sound like. So, on how we can think of possible relationships, possible entanglements, possible multiple becomings that do not take difference as a strategy to legitimate pillars of hierarchical construct, but as a possibility of being equal on becoming through difference, and taking the notion of difference as what emerged as an effect of connections and relations within and between bodies, affective traces, and affirmative processes. So in order to do that, we are honored to welcome and introduce Robertino Cevianic, Vanessa Lorenzo, Oscar Martin, and Brandon Lavelle, that they are here today with us. So let me introduce very briefly all the artists here. Robertino Cevianic is based in Ljubljana. Her art research focuses since several years into cultural, biopolitical, chemical, and biological realities of aquatic environments, which serves as a starting point to investigate and tackle the philosophical questions on the intersection of art, technology, and science. Her ideas and concepts are often realized in collaboration with others through interdisciplinary and informal integrations in her work. And she is a member of Hacteria Network and is a, let's say that even for biofriction as a project, Hacteria, let's say that is a condition of possibility for the projects because of all the proposals, activities, and notes of active and affirmative resistance that they've been articulating through these years. So she's a member of Hacteria Network and Teremi di Orchestra. She was awarded with honorary mention Prix Ars Electronica in 2016, Starts 2016 nomination and nomination for the White Afroid Award. Robertina was Shape Platform 2017 artist, and in 2018 she was resident artist at Ars Electronica Imape Mare. And her work, Aurelia, Protoviva Generator, is since 2019 part of the BIP Electronic Art Collection, Spain, that, if I'm not wrong, you could see in the exhibition at the Art Santa Monica, right? Yes. So, Vanessa Lorenzo, also very welcome here, is an artist, researcher, and transdisciplinary designer based in Lausanne, in Switzerland. Trained as product designer, engineering Elisaba and Mondragon University, and media designer in HED in Geneva. She focuses on objects that address intimate interdependencies between human and the ecologies that we are embedded in. Influenced by ethnofiction, feminist theory, and speculative design methodologies, she creates scenarios embedding people, the more human than human, and the technologies that interweave them in order to enable odd sympathies and post-anthropocentric futures. She is resident artist at the moment at Utopiana in Geneva, board member of Hackquarium, biohackerspace in Lausanne since 2014, part of the Hacteria Network as well, and operates from her studio Hybridoa at Les Ateliers in Lausanne, and of course she is one of the members of Living Instruments Collective. And also we have here today with us, very welcome as well, Oscar Martin, that is already doing a residency in Germany, but generally he's based in Barcelona. So he's a Bachelor of Fine Arts in sculpture and new media, independent artist, researcher, and programming, working in the field of algorithmic poetics and the study of generative and chaotic systems applied to the artistic context in different formats, sound art, installations, and performance, always under the premises of DIY and do it with others or do it together. And his artistic practice could be understood as polyhedral device of knowledge where art, science, and technology converge and hybridize from an orthodox critical and experimental approach. So, yes, and of course we have here today with us Brandon Lavelle. He is an artist, writer, and theorist working with questions of social life, cultural history, voice, and agency. Guided by situated and horizontal methodologies, he develops and presents artistic projects and performances within a range of international contexts, mostly working in public and with informal spaces. And central to his practice is initiating collaborative activities with others, often supported by forms of performative pedagogy and self-organization. And this leads to performative installations, poetic theater, storytelling, and research actions aimed at form of experimental community making. From gestures of intimacy and listening to create festivity and open movement works, his practice aligns itself with a politics and poetics of radical civility. And he is currently directing the artistic research project Communities in the Movement at the Department of Contemporary Art at the University of Bergen, in collaboration with Club Mama Zagreb, the Electroacoustic Music Association of Spain, and Savi Contemporary in Berlin. So, given the fact that, as you can imagine, and of course, Brandon Lavelle, he is the author of Sonic Agency, this book that is at the bottom of this round table, Sonic Agency, Sounds and Emergent Forms of Resistance. So given the fact that the general framework of this conversation is the encounters, let's say, intersections and entanglements between sonic agency as means for enabling new conceptualizations of the public sphere and expressions of emancipatory practices in this particular context related to biopractical and bioexperimental practices. I would kindly ask Brandon, if you could briefly introduce the notion of sonic agency for those who are listening to us and haven't had the opportunity to read the book, at least not yet. So, when you want. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Laura. Yes, and thank you for having me here. It's wonderful to join everybody around these topics. Very stimulating, very engaging, also for me, very important topics. I can say, a little bit of a kind of introduction to sonic agency as a topic, and somehow how I try to theorize it, for instance, in the publication. There's maybe a few directions that I could share. I mean, I think for myself, primarily on a fundamental level, to kind of understand sonic agency, if we sort of think about the experiences we have of sound, for instance, or if we understand and consider sound as a material force, I think it's quite clear we can recognize the ways in which sound contributes to forms of collective mobilization, to forms of community building, to kind of mobilizing and enhancing particular kind of emancipatory struggles, the ways in which sound participates or contributes to those situations or those projects. For me, I was very interested to kind of like identify that and also reflect upon that in a way to really consider it more directly and more consciously, to think in what ways sound is contributing, or in what ways sound and sonic materiality maybe in a way even acts as a kind of weapon on one hand, a kind of very physical, concrete force. At the same time, you know, I also feel that sonic agency is also something also very delicate and very fragile and very sensitive. If we think about the ways in which we draw upon sound, and we also have to kind of include listening, I think, in this conversation, the ways in which sound and listening participate in the crafting of dialogue. For instance, how important that is to experiences of exchange, particularly across situations of conflict and struggle. So the crafting of dialogue, if we think about, you know, understandings of empathy and compassion, all the ways in which sound, voice, and listening kind of really contribute and participate in those situations, in the crafting of dialogue and so forth, to really, in a way, enable us to also be very considerate for instance, the vulnerable or the weak, the marginal, you know, to really kind of extend ourselves towards those positions, for instance. So those are sort of some aspects. Another, maybe, I also wanted to, in a way, not only identify sound as a materiality, as a force, but also in a way to sort of ask ourselves, you know, what becomes of agency, what becomes of understandings of agency, if we focus on sound, listening, voice. Does, in a way, agency sort of change, or does sound kind of make possible other approaches to understanding agency as a kind of gesture of self-determination, or as a kind of approach towards power? So I think maybe more of this as a kind of sonic imaginary, you know, what kind of imaginaries does sonic agency nurture as well as kind of arise out of? So I really wanted to also think about this, you know, what happens to the political from a position of sonic agency. And in doing that, I really, you know, also wanted to think carefully about listening, you know, to, in a way, think, well, in a way, what happens to agency if we place the listener at the center of things? You know, there is a way in which we understand agency to be very much about, for instance, the freedom of speech, you know, the gesture of voice, the idea of speaking out, the outspokenness of agency. I really also wanted to sort of shift and think, what about the freedom of listening? Is there a way in which the listener can be understood as an activist, for instance? So in a way, again, to sort of open up, you know, what happens to agency from a sonic perspective. So that was also sort of like one of the key gestures or sort of undertakings in the project.
Thank you so much, Brandon. So precisely, regarding this question on sound as a material force that is directly related to care as well, and how this particular material force affects agency. I would like to ask Vanessa, Robertina, and Oscar how this materiality of sound affects your practices, or what kind of presence it has in your practices. If you can elaborate on, from your own experience working and experimenting with biomaterials. Who's going?
Okay. Okay, I can start. So regarding to sound agencies, I must say that my work focuses specifically in critical media biopractices in a moment where the biospheric crisis is at its best, let's say, and often I combine nature and technology to sound out that biospheric crisis that cuts across politics, gender, and culture. So, in general, the concept of I work on is hybrid media ecologies in the sense of a triad of humans, more than humans, and technology or biotechnology. And a little bit in the same line as Brandon said before, with listen the unlistened. And in my case, I approach these hybrid objects as new knowledge tools, in the sense that I problematize the human exceptionalism by putting the human out of the center and the more than human and the technology that intertwine them more in the center. And through sound, I think sound is a very powerful way to speculate about how would this more than human or the other would articulate a voice themselves. And that's why I use a lot of speculative techniques and some inspiration from science fiction and a lot of feminist theory as well, because of this notion of for me it's a little bit a petri dish as an epistemic object, in a sense that in the unfolding ontology of this container that has humans and non-humans in biological, chemical, political, and cultural functions, this care and this attention to the other, noticing the other, it has a lot of importance, a lot of weight. And of course, because of this transactional nature of the object, it encounters a lot of resistance and or friction, as it problematizes this human exceptionalism, or beyond this liberal humanism, a future where we review or we imagine another world ecology of capital, politics, resources, in which not all humans have the same responsibility. And yeah, also these frictions, of course, happened because of the experimental nature of making the object. Let's say we mix materials with fungi and electric wires, and there is a sort of intention that achieve a symbiotic ecological assemblages, but with a queering desire to rewild culture, but sometimes, of course, they partially digest each other, sometimes they assimilate each other, rubbing up categories of kingdoms, species, gender, and culture. And yeah, I think sound is, in this case, a way to foster new post-anthropocentric imaginaries and yeah, listen to, or gives us the tools to listen to the others.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And precisely, that relation in between sound as a material force and at the same time listening as a political act. and action, and how then the things such as scale are, like making this shift that is hacking all the, let's say, pre-established ontological categories, for example. But what about you, Robertina and Oscar? How this, how sounds affect your practices?
Hello. So the thoughts which Vanessa and Brandon shared with us already resonating a lot with me. If I would go into the most, if I dive into this, but I'm like the most interested inside of my practice in connection with sound is like especially the sound of the ones which we can't see. As Brandon is also writing about this in his book, So in my work, I work a lot with underwater sound environments and sound ecologies which they're happening there. And in that work, I'm kind of going back and forth between the bioacoustics, because the oceans and seas and also rivers and all these aquatic environments, they have like really amazing soundscapes by itself, the biodiversity and everything is like very rich. But then our human presence is like very there through all these kind of technological interventions and actions which are constantly happening through the traffic with boats and ships and all drilling of the oils and stuff like that, So there's like lots of us being there without us knowing about it. This means that we are unaware what is happening there because we just don't, it's not our usual environment. And in oceans and seas, because of physicality of water, the density of it, and because of the materiality by itself, it's used, the sound travels 5 to 7 times wider and longer than in the air. So we should be aware that there is like the sound which we can't even understand, even though that we do record a lot with hydrophones. I use this technique a lot, this is like this passive listening and recording, and there's also other technologies how it's possible to do that. Is, we hear part of the spectrum, and there is still so much which we can't understand because our technology is not there yet with that. At least we always reinterpret it to the ways that we can hear it. So to get back to the topic of care, in my work, especially in the series of works which I called Aquatocene, where I work especially on this problematic of human presence in the oceans and seas, I really tried to bring out especially this aspect of care. And with my concerts, with my compositions, I try to bring these sound environments also nearer to the public, to us. And at the same time, I'm also many times giving my platform also and sharing it with other scientists and people because they're actually working on this on a daily basis. Because I think it's very important not just to bring this, because sometimes, because of, it's really weird, and I think we will speak later on further about that also, is like these kind of very noisy sounds, which I'm putting them together in the performances, people tell me sometimes that they're enjoyable, and that's kind of like, this is the weird way how we normalize something, and this normalization of some specific noise or some specific sound can be also very interesting to research. So similar, like Vanessa said before, like hybrid ecologies, it's like very interesting topics, how to navigate all this interdisciplinarity. So, and how to build these empathic strategies, how to be better in listening to something which we can't hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Oscar?
Vale. Okay. About Yes, the song, I think that the song is very powerful and also very, very mysterious, no? It's some phenomenon that's always matter that in between, no? In the listening, no? I think that is like very important, the act of listening, no? How we listen. I think that also could be a very powerful tools, like Vanessa said, to listen to the other, no? And to reconnected us with this otherness, no? And sometimes have the capacity to expand our conscience and start to vibrate and make us vibrating in other ways, no? Talking more about my work, I always been, very interested in research about the complexity that we see in the reality. I use the word reality for not to say nature or non-nature or this kind of thing. And then for me, I'm very interested how this magic emerges from the bottom, no? From the interaction of different kind of agents. Then I have some works where I work more with mechanical agents, no? Algorithms or electronic. Other works that I decide to work, to invite to work with living beings, no? In the case of the work I'm doing here, I'm researching now, this the bionic sound machine, no? That there is some kind of alliance between a slight mole, that is a very interested living beings, no? That is not a plant, it's not an animal, it's also is not a mushroom. Have a lot of interesting intelligent behavior or sentient behavior. Some way is connecting in alliance with a mechanical agent, and they together in some kind of biofeedback are evolving to something like a new place that you don't control, no? That in this kind of process, no, working with this agent, you release the control of the process, and you make this movement. You have to put in other. You have to move, no? You are more in the center, doing the decision, the aesthetic decision. You have to make this exercise of moving to other place and interact with this system in listening the system, no? And have some kind of feedback you can modulate. And for me, this is that I am interested, no? How this system can can give us other solution or get us to new space of vibration, no? In the case of song, you said, and I think that this is like some of the political point, no? That cross the thing, no? That we as artists we are connected, no? With the problematic that the human, the anthropos, we are living now, no? And because sometimes the audience thinks that the artists are living in some kind of evasive world, but we are worried about or is affecting us, no? And then we try just to speculate, to materialize words that make generate more speculation, no? And also with the sound, no? That is something abstract but have a lot of power, no? For this affecting our conscience, no? Our way to perceive. Mhm. Yeah, I think yes, continues later.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Yeah, in fact, I was thinking that precisely, I mean, taking as a reference all your interventions on sound as a material force, and also, at least I understood that in your practices, your projects, your conception of sound as a material force, and also the sonic agency in this general framework of this roundtable, what we've called the biosonic agencies in plural. I was thinking I was thinking about sound as a relational material, as a relational event. So it seems pretty clear to me that in all your practices, in all your approaches, in all of your articulations on your projects, this combination, and at the same time in between listening and sound, that in a way, as Brandon remarks in his book, relates us to the non-yet apparent, no? These other realities, other worlds that when we finally can hear the unheard, no? For example, with very low frequencies, no? Different kinds of subalternities, the non-human subalternities, for example, something happens there. So it seems pretty clear to me from your interventions that probably we agree that in these terms, sonic agency can hack, in a way, pre-established discourses, visual regimes, and ontological violence, as Vanessa already said, on, for example, human exceptionalism. But regarding agency, because of the particular amount of differences in terms of agent, going back to agency, and because of this kind of entanglements, because of this kind of relationships, because of this becoming together in the estrangement, no? How this estrangement, like becoming there together with different agents, what kind of agency is being articulated there? I'm not sure if the question is pretty clear, but is a distributed agency. I mean, because I think that sometimes also is difficult. I mean, we can formulate something in terms of agency that can work in terms of theoretical abstraction, but regarding ethics, regarding the political and no separability in between ontology, epistemology, ethic, the political, what kind of consequences has this, what kind of agency is a distributed agency, is equal for all of the agents involved within its differences? What do you think about it?
Yes, maybe I can make a comment. Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely wonderful to kind of hear all the kind of diverse perspectives through everybody's practices, and I also very much identify and love the way in which sound clearly has this kind of incredible flexibility and this sort of very empowering kind of it makes a very sort of empowering intervention into something, I think into something very abstract, as kind of Oscar was mentioning, something kind of mysterious, abstract, but also, as Vanessa says, allows for a certain kind of speculation, to allow us to engage the unseen. So it clearly is something that is kind of constantly, opening up many different kinds of possibilities and pathways that, for me, I think needs to be really quite taken quite seriously in terms of something that on one hand is very enriching and very empowering and very connective and very generative, and at the same time also is something that is sort of a little bit beyond our control. You know, I mean, these kind of entanglements and this, you know, to listen to the other is also to really also, how to say, you know, to become something we can't recognize. In a way, I mean, the consequences of that, for me, you know, really imply that we enter into something that, you know, kind of is slightly unnameable, you know, I think. And that's part of its richness, you know, that's part of its power. So in terms of identifying a kind of, you know, what kind of agency this is, I mean, I tend to think of it as something that, you know, is in a way sort of monstering what we know as the body, as we know as human agency, as we know even in terms of relationships. I mean, that's maybe one thing I you know, to maybe offer is this framework of monstering and the kind of the unnameability of that and the kind of unrecognizability that emerges, you know, if we are to really hear the unheard or engage with the unseen. Yeah, I mean, this is just some immediate thoughts that come to mind, and I think that's, again, to be taken quite seriously and sort of considered in terms of this alien and the estrangement that comes with that. I'm sure others have comments.
Would you like to add something? Okay, Robertina, go for it.
I would just continue now into this topic of the otherness. I worked a lot and taught a lot when I was developing some of my series of performances where I'm actually interacting live on stage with jellyfish, which they're quite other animal, you know, it's something which we can't relate through just looking at them. It's not the same like with dogs and cats and all these species which we are kind of used to be together or we are kind of having interactions. So working with that and trying to figure it out, there are some systems, it was really hard, you know. On the end of the day, I have to say I still don't understand them. I was just trying to reinterpret how they are reacting to what the sound is. And us and me together on stage, I was just trying to be partly active as a sound, as somebody who was like doing some live generated sound, and partly they had been generating some soundscapes. So at least through this, it was kind of like each of us has a bit of the control inside of that. And this kind of enabling of power and enabling of presence was kind of my strategy for that art piece, that it was kind of working, that with them we are together there. And when I was explaining about the piece, I like to use words from Paul Celan, who said that there are still songs to sing beyond mankind, you know, humankind. I like to use it more. But it's, you know, it's that, you know, what is our culture through the sound, you know, like it's only us, and how do we, because many times we interpret like all these other sounds of something like as a signal for food, or, you know, we are kind of like using it as an instrument in the sense of like just giving the impulses, but it's not thinking about the contextualization. So that's like my comment on this topic.
And I also wanted to say, in relation to what Brandon and Oscar and also Martina already said about otherness, but more in relation to the non-control that you were mentioning, Oscar. And I think actually that's the point. I don't know if you you already made a performance with your actual work with the blob. But for me, the fact that the modern human, which is non-controllable, actually. I mean, we try to plug wires, we try to command with algorithms and check the sound, everything is all right. And then in the performance or during the public dissemination event, you don't have any control, and this causes a lot of stress. Like, it can turn your favorite project into your nightmare, and I think that's precisely the interesting point, because I think by acknowledging and giving a powerful position to the modern human in something so risky for an artist as a public performance, you are really subverting the hierarchical ontology of power between humans and modern humans embodied in a life experiment. And I'm already stressed, but I think that's for me the point. It's so stressful, and the fact that it's mirroring a sort of orderness in us, because we lose control, and also because sometimes by speculating, which we made the other mimicking us, and suddenly that causes a very sort of heavy dramatic monstering, or where we have to embrace that alterity in the other and in us, because we lose control, and we are not used to lose control. I think that's a very powerful moment.
Yes, I think that this is risky and very powerful, but I tried to accept it to be. I mean, that it's going to be is that it's going to be, But yeah, but always there is some kind of control. I mean, you are doing the mediation, you are doing the design, and you give more or less autonomy, to the system. But yeah, sometimes there is not any way to control. No, they do that whatever they want. No, but but I think that this is beautiful. No, also. And I think that creates empathy, sometimes when I usually don't work with direct sonification, for example, but when I work with this sonification, really generates a big empathy with the audience, and this is some kind of expansion with through the technology of some way of communication, create a new way of communication to understand that there is a sentient being, there that is affecting for our present, for our thoughts, maybe for the situation, and I think that this is when matter. I love it, I like a lot, that you can generate this a little bit change, and this empathy with this otherness. Other question here is the care, You are working in your process, and you have to care of these living beings, In the case that you are living beings, To care of them, also change technology that you are using, in this system, and what matter when you go to the museum or to the exhibition space, It's a big negotiation to try that. Not all, but some, to understand that this is not a painting that you put in the wall and you go home, switch the light, and that's that. There is some ethic that sometimes for me make friction. No, I mean this is sometimes I think not to come back to work with living beings, no, in an art installation because I don't know, I don't feel totally comfortable, no, with the situation that you give to them.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking, in fact, that there's a kind of uncertainty, no, in this kind of entanglement, in this kind of encounters, in this kind of, let's say, relationships, and in a way, I was wondering, or I'm wondering, if precisely regarding this uncertainty that all of you were mentioning, no, this difference from having a relationship based on control, or having a relationship based on happening, or on events, on becoming, and also on interdependence. In a way, I was wondering if this kind of uncertainty is, or if we could, conditional, say there, let's say that it's a kind of a liminal stage in between, this tricky boundary in between otherness and togetherness, no? Like we are like floating in this between, well, that you in your practices are, let's say, floating through, no, all the time. Yeah? Do you agree?
Yeah. No, I think absolutely, Laura. I forget someone had talked about this betweenness, and maybe in a way that betweenness, as you say, is really something also about singularity and plurality, or togetherness and estrangement, or somehow this betweenness that I think also, I get the feeling that that's actually, that becomes the material itself, is also how to occupy that betweenness, how to cultivate that, the approach to the other, or how to nurture these kind of conditions in which these kind of relationalities can emerge. And I really get the feeling that it's very much also about somehow how we hold that, how we hold that space of encounter. So in a way, it is a kind of craft that I feel, it's almost a kind of acoustic, for me it's a sort of acoustic craft of holding that space that I think also listening really enables. Even if we think about this conversation we're having now, the way in which listening kind of holds this space, it holds the other in that moment of dialogue, and it kind of keeps that betweenness in place, it kind of keeps it there, however unsteady it is, however frictional it is, however mysterious or complicated or political, for communication to maybe happen. And it does make me think about sort of two things. One would be sort of the ethical. In a way, can we understand ethics, or the ethical is something that is also participating in that holding, in that craft. And then also what I like to think of as ecologies of attention. Then in a way, maybe we're also working at ecologies of attention, and that's also a very caring kind of gesture or attitude in terms of again creating these ecologies of attention, or modifying these ecologies. So somehow I was curious a little bit about these perspectives when you were talking, Laura, about this uncertainty also.
Yeah, in fact, also I was wondering if precisely related to this let's say, ethical dimension or to ethics and these ecologies of attention as well. That in terms of this uncertainty and this, like in-betweenness, would you say that in a way, because of the estrangement, because of this precisely this in-betweenness, the particular encounters that you are referring to could be thought, I don't want to use define, but you can use it if you want, if these particular encounters with, not just with the human ones, but with non-human agents, with multiple entities, but also processes. You think that these particular encounters could be thought as precisely of this estrangement, could be thought as bodies of noise, with the potential in terms of power, but not the restrictive one, the affirmative one in terms of generative power, no? In terms of potential, in fact. Would you think that could be thought, this kind of encounters, as a body of noise? Okay. Who wants to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's a very interesting perspective, Laura, and I mean, to also bring in the topic of noise, I think it's also very, very helpful and productive as well, in terms of understanding, this kind of, these kind of encounters as also encounters that challenge us and that challenge kind of cultural meaning, challenge understandings of what constitutes a body, and of course what constitutes our kind of worldview, or how we of course share in the world, all these things. So I do find that noise, for me, is a very positive, very productive vocabulary and material and experience, and should be sort of in a way sort of mobilized and thought in those terms. So maybe I allow also some other perspectives.
Okay. Would you like to add something, Oscar? Okay. Yes.
Yeah, for me, it's coming to my head about this encounter and noise is something like it. When we go to this encounter and we try to open us to this otherness, we have to leave our language codes, no, or codes, and then we need the noise code and then perceiving other things, no. Maybe we perceive like noise because we still don't have the patterns, no, or some kind of new codification, no. And this is, I think that also the powerful of noise, no, that is something that transgressed, no, and broken or stimulated the openness, no.
Okay. Robertina or Vanessa, would you like to add something on this? Okay, Vanessa?
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm also thankful that the noise topic was brought to the table. I think, yeah, of course, as in its undefinition, noise has its very powerful nature, and I want to say that for all the noisemakers that are now listening from other places where the situation is especially tense, or they are really suffering friction in their own bodies, and it's a sort of language that in its definition it leaves room to a lot of discourses, and it doesn't matter which medium. Well, it doesn't matter which tools are you using, but it's a moment in which you can allow to imagine other kind of storytelling and other kind of voices raising, and it doesn't have to be a more than human natural being. It can be also a way to subvert a technology or rescue a technology and make something else. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say actually.
So, like, it's always, for me, this kind of quite challenging to speak about noise as a sound construct, as a contract of sound composition, or, you know, when you're like performing with noise with different devices, instead of the concert or different environments where we many times do this, you know, as noise artists. And then there's also noise which is like perceived through as a distortion. So when the distortion starts to be the pleasure, it's always very intriguing and interesting for me. And why does this happen? And why is this kind of making us feel so good when you listen to it, you know? Or relaxing sometimes. So I have mostly questions about that, because in the last years I went from being like really quite strong noise artist into much more dealing lately with some ecologists, you know, so it's a bit going in the other directions. But yeah, this is always the question, as I mentioned before, when I do my photo-skin performances, where I go into very noisy structures of these different recordings which I'm making and presenting them, and it starts to be beautiful in some covert way. And it's always interesting why this is like making this beauty. And then on the other hand, yeah, we can't romanticize the ecology in the sense of like, yeah, ecology is always only the bioacoustics of environment or something. It's our human acoustics also very present. So we live in the cities, we are used, or villages, and of course there's different variations of it, but mostly we are used to be exposed to that. So this makes us feel also very comfortable because it's a home sound, you know? Like the combination of the sound and feeling comfortable inside of the space or environment, or uncomfortability, it can be very much the otherness. And here this monstrosity with Brandon mentioned before is also very interesting. Who is the monster in this kind of context, you know, who is doing this kind of monstrosity sounds? And why do we perceive them like that? So it's like it's back and forth. So I don't know if I said like answered to some questions, but mostly I'm really opening them, and lately even more, because I'm really trying to navigate that, but by myself, to understand it also, and also how to explain this when I speak with public about it. You know, you know, how to not be too romantic in the idea of the sound environment, but also not to be too harsh in the way of defending these kind of very uncomfortable situations to the others.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I was thinking of when I was referring to these, let's say, particular encounters from estrangement, and also within the question of monsters, monstering, who is the monster, or who are the monsters now. I was referring not just to noise as sound construct in a way, but maybe at least I intended to refer to noise in terms of onto epistemological force of disruption. because I think that in your practices, there's something happening there in terms of noise that is hacking the hierarchical narratives, some hierarchical discourses, some hierarchical articulations on subjectivity, on agency, and its consequences, such as, for example, ethics. No? So in this sense, I think that I was referring to this body of noise in terms of the consequences. No? Vanessa also already mentioned the ones who are under some different circumstances right now. For example, the ones, not just some frictions, but the ones who are suffering for the consequence of some super perverse fictions. And this is something that we've been talking about quite a lot in different situations. Now, for example, the ones who are suffering the consequences of a super perverse fiction, such as Borders, right? So, or ontological privilege, like being the only one to be recognized as moral subject, for example, no? In case of human exceptionalism. But for that reason, in terms of consequences and affections, and, you know, like the material scars of this kind of articulations, I was wondering if this, let's say, if you want, like general conception within this roundtable of noise in terms of for an onto-epistemological force of disruption, I think that it gives us, all of us, the possibility to, for example, to articulate, to take care in a different way. And if we think of ethics or on possible ethical articulations, responses, I think that it's completely different, because it's not just about being in, and it's not just about being with, but becoming together. And that's something that it's absolutely different, no? And is a challenge, because sometimes, of course, as I was as I was mentioning before, it can become an oxymoron in a way, no? Because some post-anthropocentric perspective articulations at the end can be an oxymoron. But in a micro, let's say, layers, I think that it's important to think of this possibility of these encounters as body of noise in terms of disruptive potential, in order to generate and to articulate different realms in ethical, ontological, epistemological, and of course political terms, layers, and realities and consequences.
I wanted to add to that. I think, like, for me, this a way that I know or I experienced when I was growing up. I grew up in a political turmoil, very tense, with terrorism from the state and also from a community in my region. So it's sound and very brutal articulation of metallic sounds in an area where the industry was also very heavy.
Mm-hmm.
We all worked around huge machines, metal making machinery, and it was curious to see, like, how from Friday to Sunday we will all appropriate those sounds and incorporate them in our moment of evasion or escapism from reality.
Yeah.
And also in a region where nature, it was also totally structured, or it was not having its place. For me, it was always something very core to where I come from, to try to link this way of appropriating those sounds that came from a system and resistance in those political and industrial pillars, and try to put it also in a third place, or with a third agent. It was lacking in all of that in a way.
Yeah, I think that we are running out of time. Wow, really? Okay. What? Okay. Maybe we can also share some questions from the audience. Yeah. Okay. Well, in the meantime, okay. Yeah, thanks, Carolina.
Thank you for the conversation. And we have someone from the streaming on YouTube. Her name is Carolina. I'm sorry, Carolina, I'm going to pronounce your name really badly. Siniewicz. And she's asking your personal opinion on the relationship between sound and language, if they are identical. And she's interested in your personal opinion about that. Thank you.
Sound and
Language.
Language.
Wow. Okay. Robertina goes for it.
Okay. That's a very interesting question. Hello, Carolina. We collaborated with her together in the bioconfliction also. So sound and language, I think it's like a long debate, which should be at least take some while. But when I work with non-other, like the non-human, and the others, which we try to understand, I think that sometimes this understanding between what is the language and what is the sound can interconnect, in the sense of like the language, yes, we use it, we are used to it, and we know how to navigate it. It's kind of like very coded, symbolical way how to be able to understand each other very quickly. And then we have also the body language and all the other sensorium, which is also important next to it, which in all this COVID time and in all these boxes of Zoom, we all constantly talk to each other that we feel deprived of being together in the same room, because to the body language, to the actions, even if you say the same words, can be perceived totally different. So there is always this kind of question between that. So, and on the other hand, like languages, not all languages are used the same, you know, and not all the languages have the same kind of connotations. So to have like a bit of more polyglottic view into the languages is always good, I think. It's like, okay, we all agree kind of to use this simplified English as our main communication tool that is helping us to go to be connected in this kind of global constellations. But there is always interesting for me when I hear that some languages are having like really different ways how they explain even the you know, the ways how you take the road, or the numbers, or like the numbering in French for me is always like very abstract, you know, and stuff like that. So I think it's always interesting to have in mind that sound and language, they can be quite disconnected from this.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to add that also it's, for example, in oral language and written, the written one, I think that one of the main difference, I would say, but you can answer because I'm not an expert on sound at all, But I would say that one of the main differences in terms of constitutive difference is that the oral and the written one are normative structures. And one of the, at least to me, the potentials of sonic agency and sound as a material forms is related to the fact that not always is related to a normative structure. And there's something there in terms of, and not always is related to a representational realm. So I think that there's some potential there in terms of power, affirmative power, that it's completely different. But just a comment. Would you like to add something else, Vanessa, Brandon, or Oscar, on this question about language and sound? Okay. Would you, or?
You'd like me to? I wasn't sure if there was other questions that we should, or we can continue with this topic.
Is the only question by now, so we can continue if you want to.
Yeah, no, I mean it's yeah, as Robertina said, it's a very complex and wide question and topic that of course is also very central, I think, to to kind of discussions around sound, agency, sociality. And I think as everyone's working also in terms of I'm also very interested to think, the way in which sound leads us towards the edges of a certain sociality, the edges of a certain social world, the edges of a human world, in which language clearly maybe it's no longer reliable, or so I think language for me keeps us, in the space of human sociality, and within that, I think quite clearly that language is and isn't sound at the same time, and it's clearly very, very connected to voice and to how we, acquire speech and participate in the culture of speech. So clearly there is this kind of, very strong intersection between the two topics. At the same time, I think quite clearly it's important to also allow them to be separate, or to allow them to not always equate or not always remain connected. So, for instance, I've been very interested in looking into deaf culture and into sign language, the sort of culture of signing, which kind of argues against a kind of phonocentric understanding of language. The ways in which there is this kind of historical, metaphysical legacy that always understands language as being voice, as being sound, as being, that we define our human subjectivity through the ability to speak. And quite clearly within deaf culture there is a real struggle and a real fight and a real argument to sort of, to sort of decolonize that whole project in order to allow, other types of voice to emerge. So this is one side that I think is really important, and in terms of the discussion around sound and language. Again, that to sort of see them as being deeply connected, and at the same time, the politics around that connection, I think, needs to be engaged.
Yeah, totally. Engage, and I was thinking of the importance of paying attention in terms of care also to these different scales at the same time, yes. Would you like to ask something, to add something else about language and sound, or do we have more? No. Or if you want to add, we have like some minutes less, so if you want to, would you like to add something else on the general conversation? We could last forever, at least me, because I'm learning a lot, yeah, but yeah, I was thinking precisely related to this question on sound and language, and I mean the language in terms of the spoken language and the written one. I was thinking of course, of Judith Butler. So and at the same time, I think that okay, yeah, and I think that. Some of the things that you've been discussing today, I think that in a way this, let's say, multiplicity of generative note in terms of potential, in terms of how different extended subjectivities are becoming within your practices, where you are enmeshed and entangled with different entities. I don't want to use beings, entities, processes. If you want to use beings, okay. But I think that when, for example, we think of this interdependence, this relationship in terms of cares, there's something in Judith Butler that I think that it's pretty important here, and maybe also we can take it as a final idea to keep on thinking about it, that even in this estrangement, even in this will of being equal in our differences, there's always an arbitrary distinction between species, for example, at some point. So I think that it's important that we can ignore our role as humans, at least for now, in what we could call, in terms of Judith Butler, this kind of responsibility of asymmetries, no? And I think that also the experience of sound as a force, as a relational event, if we refer to sonic agency, this responsibility in terms of asymmetries, I think that it's something quite interesting to think about. It was just with the language and Judith Butler, I was like connecting these ideas. So, okay.
Yes, are we finished, or I don't know?
No, we have 6 more minutes.
Okay. No, I was only. No, I really appreciate. I mean, all that you're bringing up right now, and it made me think a little bit, going back to our discussion about noise, and the kind of politics around noise. It made me think, that if we can also sort of maybe interrogate a little bit the ways in which certain kind of acoustic norms or sort of acoustic values, or maybe even acoustic regimes, that in a way, those kind of regimes or kind of normative sort of structures, for instance, that in a way define, that end up sort of defining what counts as noise. I mean, if we think of the acoustic norms that then make us understand something like deviant sound, that if we understand noise as a sound out of place. So I'm really interested, then we might even say that a responsibility for us as kind of practitioners or as agents, the responsibility might be, in fact, to listen to noise. The responsibility to bring our listening to noise would, I think, supply us with a certain kind of resistant, a certain kind of emancipatory potential in terms of interrupting the kind of acoustic norms that sort of keep certain sounds in place and certain sounds out of place. So I think we could maybe talk about a certain responsibility around listening in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. Yes. So, Vanessa, Robertino, Oscar, would you like to add something on this?
I just wanted to add something related to the topic of interactions and also related to noise. In the frame of biofriction, the work that we are just developing with the notion of hybrids and trying to work at the cell scale and trying to understand how could we hybridize an animal cell with a plant. In this process, we have to produce patches of cells. And I recently knew that Adam Saretsky and Aaron Katz, other practitioners, they already, also Ruth Tonita from the UK, they already worked on the effects of sound in the development of the growth of these different cell lines. And this is quite powerful because, I mean, the connection is there. Skin is what makes us, and it's the membrane between us and the world, and it's a sort of an experiment of fact. And I'm just researching more and more about this. It's something that I think it could be very interesting.
Yeah, totally. Okay, we have just one more minute, no more questions, so maybe we should finish. Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been a super pleasure to listen to you all, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you very much for your brilliant contributions and your kindness and generosity. And thank you very much as well to all organizers, and let me take the opportunity to give special thanks to Angar's staff, because they've been working pretty hard during summer in order to take care of this roundtable and some other activities that will be happening during these days. So thanks again to all of you, to you for all your ideas, reflection, for being generous enough to share it here in this kind of strange displays and online embodiment. But it's been a pleasure, so I hope that we meet soon, and thank you so much. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.